This is the coolest show brought to you by Hip Hop Caucuses. Think 100%.
It's the coolest show you know, keep the culture connected. It's the coolest show you know, in your ear, yeah, respected. Expert level information, entertainment, education. Rev Yearwood got you covered as you hit your destination. Climate rules everything around me. Cream. For those who lost focus, close your eyes and just dream. Open your third eye, now the world is your off. Coolest show you know, it's the Hip Hop Caucus.
Hey everybody, this is Rev Yearwood, your host of the coolest show, and welcome back. As you know, we are back in my home state of Louisiana, and we have been having some powerful conversations. And today, I could not have this conversation without the wonderful, phenomenal Region 6 EPA Administrator, Dr. Earthea Nance. Dr. Nance, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm fighting.
You know, that's a great way. You know, we need you to fight.
That's right.
We need you to fight. So we got to start this off the right way. As you know, I had EPA Administrator Michael Regan on the show. And not on that couch, but on a similar type chair. We've had folks, you know, from the White House, from Ali Zaidi to Dr. Jalan White Newsom. Not on that couch, but in a similar chair.
Yeah.
But I asked this question, you know, what's the greatest HBCU in the land? Take your time now. No, this is not about petrochemicals or not about, you know, plastics.
Morehouse.
Lord have mercy. Okay, well, this was look, thank y'all for joining the coolest show. We appreciate y'all for coming to this. Oh, no, well, we appreciate that. We have HBCU level. I know Regan is probably laughing right now as he's listening to this. wherever he is, he's probably saying Aggie pride. So let me say that for him, Aggie pride. And for me, let me say for Howard Nation, you know, HU, and then they would say, there you go. Our producers yelled out in the crowd. See, we got it rigged. Dr. Nance, for folks who don't know you, who is Dr. Nance?
Dr. Nance, I'm a person who has an engineering background. I'm very technical, but I really care about people and the environment. There have been a few times in my life where I was tested on that. Times when I used to work in the private engineering sector, where I noticed the types of communities that were served and those who were not served. When I was doing my dissertation research, and I saw from an international perspective, the inequity in basic infrastructure service and in environmental protection. And those times when I was tested, I always made the decision to move in the direction where I could use my technical background in service of people who needed more protection and people who needed infrastructure. So that's what I'm doing in my current job. I'm using the combination of the skills of working with community and having technical background and putting those together in service of the communities who need help the most.
Obviously, we're here. Shout out to the Banner sisters.
Yes.
Joy and Joe Banner in the Descendants Project. This is where we're having this conversation here in Louisiana, St. John's Parish. This is also the site of the 1811, the largest slave revolt uprising, in which our people have been fighting for liberation forever.
Yep.
And they have been building community within that struggle. So the question to you is, who is your community?
Who is my community?
Right.
I feel most affinity with the community in the environmental justice movement. I've worked for 20 years. I've moved here to the Gulf South to work with that community. So I'm talking about whether it's communities or advocacy or national leaders that are working in this region, the Gulf South. That's who I feel is my community.
I have to say, you have an amazing job, oversee Region 6. As someone who was a former U.S. Air Force officer myself, I know what it's like to work within the government and within that process. Talk to us about your evolution within the Environmental Protection Agency and how your career has brought you to this moment.
My evolution has been one of transformation, one of bringing new ideas into the organization, and being somewhat tenacious about it, and waiting for the transformation to take effect.
What does that mean?
And that transformation is, so we're under, right now in this administration, we're under executive orders to embed environmental justice and climate change into everything that we do. Now, we were not given instructions on how to do that. So I came in with a clear set of ideas, with a set of priorities on how to do that, but it required culture change. People had to change their perspectives and the way of working. We actually had to take ideas from the EJ movement and put them into our everyday way of doing business. So that took time. That took, shaking loose old ways of thinking and providing new ideas, being willing to challenge old ideas, being willing to innovate. And so I'd say after about 1.5 years, I'm in year 3 right now. After 1.5 years, I think we broke through. We got a palpable sense of culture change in the organization. We have, I would say, a critical mass of people who are very innovative and happy to think in this new way. Now and today, I basically am chalking up a success for that. I'm feeling like that transition has happened. Now it's a matter of how much can we do? How much success can we have on the ground? How many communities can we impact? How much money can we put on the street to community groups to do this work? And I'm very proud of where we are now. I really am. And it's not just me. As the leader of the organization, if I didn't have that vision and that drive, it wouldn't have happened. But all of the staff, I have a staff of about 730 people right now. To get a critical mass moving in the same direction, they had to be willing. They had to be willing to do that.
As you're talking, one of the things that hits me, and I'm sure it's evident to you, is the fact that not only is the EPA administrator a person of color,
yes,
but also you are a person of color. And that would be something that our ancestors could never have imagined in this place 200 years ago. You and Mr. Regan and many others are what we would call our ancestors' wildest dreams. Like literally, that they died literally in many cases in the room that we are in. They died for us to be in these positions. But we weren't put in these positions, obviously, just to be a black face in a high place. How does that weigh on you? Obviously, we had to be American. We love. I was a former Air Force officer. We love our country, but we don't forget our history. How does that weigh on you to ensure that, particularly when you see the most vulnerable, those communities are suffering? How much do you work harder, in essence, to make sure that those communities have clean air and clean water?
We are the hope of the dream of the slave, Maya Angelou. That's the idea that you just expressed. I'm aware of that, and I appreciate that you brought that up. And it does add a sense of, it does add to the drive that I have and that we have. The situation that many of the African American communities that I've worked with, their situation is extremely complex. And so it does take, it takes more. It takes more to get a good outcome. There's like deep-rooted and systemic failure in serving them as a government. And so it just takes, it takes not only, my sense of justice, but everybody in the room has to get on board, no matter what room you're in. So there's a constant advocacy that has to happen on the inside in order to get anything done in some of these areas, like where we are now, that are suffering the worst. We are talking about the worst case community, the worst case situation that communities can be in. Areas that are surrounded by industry and where the laws and the rules that are in place don't protect them. So that advocacy that we have to have happen on the inside is critical to serving them. And we have that sometimes now. We need to keep getting more of it. We need to keep growing it. But like you're saying, we have the leadership in place to make that happen. And that's what's so exciting about the position I'm in. I get to see it and I get to be part of it. We do have outcomes, but we're just getting started. Like you said, this hasn't been in place for a long time.
No.
We're just getting started. So changing those hearts and those minds on the inside, the people who are going to stay, the long-term staff, changing their hearts and minds is what we have to do. That advocacy has to actually leave something in place in someone's heart and someone's mind so that they'll carry on that work.
Dr. Nance, let's talk about old EPA, new EPA. And I specifically, as you know, my background, because you've been around me enough now. I was obviously raised when I was younger by Dr. Beverly Wright.
So was I.
Well, she changed my diapers. I wanted to change your diapers, but she did. Let me know. She changed my diapers. She'll tell that story all the time. Keep me in check, boy. I don't care how big you get, Rev. I change your diapers. Lord have mercy, Dr. Wright. You ain't got to say all that. So I think that's one of the things that's there. And then I was later mentored by Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. I was actually someone who really took me under her wing. And actually is a huge reason why the Hip Hop Caucus is where it is today. With that being said, there's obviously been a tremendous amount of powerful, particularly Black women in my life and in this role, particularly around the environmental justice. How does that, because you are in this position as a Black woman, as a woman of color, how does that also impact, and what's the legacy of that? Because there's a lot of folks, obviously, in this region that have been just amazing. From now we have the Levine family. I can go on the list. You know that. So how does that play a role? And I actually want to go into then how does that play a role within the respectability of EPA? Because the one thing that I know, and talking with Dr. Wright and many others, is that they honestly didn't feel respected as women of color in that space. And they felt that sometimes their voices changing, but throughout the years wasn't as respected. And sometimes it was also a lot of patriarchy, where other, even Black men voices were heard. Shout out to all the amazing men who have been in these positions, from Dr. Bullard to Dr. Smith, phenomenal. But really for women of color, Black women, it's been, how do you feel in this position? Do you feel the respect that you need to get, or do you understand sometimes what has been and what they could be saying?
Well, I feel blessed to have worked with Dr. Beverly Wright for the past 20 years, but to be actually working on her team for when I lived in New Orleans and worked with her for those maybe 7 or 8 years directly. She was my mentor. She still is. I'll never forget when I was at MIT and Hurricane Katrina happened. And so I came down to New Orleans with a couple of the other professors of color so we could see what we could do to help, because we had skill set, we cared, this was an unbelievable situation. And so each of us came down and started our own projects down here in New Orleans to help. And I ended up moving here. But the first conference that I attended was a conference that was being put on by the Deep South Center by Beverly Wright about Katrina.
Yeah.
And so I attended the conference and I presented my little idea for the little nonprofit that I was starting. And she invited me. She didn't even know me, but she invited me to sit with her and her staff as they debriefed after the conference. I felt like part of the family. She just brought me in. And since then, she has been a mentor to me. And so it was that creation of family, the creation of people working together towards something and being willing to be open to people, that is the special quality that she has. So I'm very lucky in that. And I have observed what you said about Black female leaders not getting the same accolades and the respect and the acknowledgement of what they do. Because some of what they do, well, there is patriarchy, but also some of what they do is like what she did for me. It was not visible. It was behind the scenes. It was one-on-one. It was with her and her staff. And it made all the difference. And I moved there after that. I felt like I could have community in New Orleans. I had never been to New Orleans before. I never saw the New Orleans that existed before Katrina. I went there when it was at its knees. And I had somebody reach out to me, a professional who was very savvy at using her knowledge of community engagement to effect change. And I had a lot to learn about that. And so I gladly moved down with my 2 children and made a career here for a while in New Orleans before I moved to Houston to work with that.
Wow.
But I can't say there's
a great bit of history there.
Yeah, I have the 2 outstanding mentors here in the region.
Yeah.
Very lucky there.
No.
But I just don't want to stop here with Dr. Wright. Not enough has been said or even could be said about her contributions to this movement. She is a leader. She inspires people. She creates family in ways that others don't. She's a special person on the planet.
No doubt about it. Actually, that leads me to this other thing, though. So she's amazing. Dr. Bullard is great.
Dr. Bullard is obviously amazing.
All of them are wonderful. What is being done from your standpoint to then empower the next generation? What are we doing? How are you? What are your thoughts on? Because we need to have a passing the baton mentality.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What's being done?
Yes.
And sometimes because of this obviously when the cover have real talk, as you know, on the Cooler Show, because of that struggle, sometimes, and I was mentored and I'm around them for all my life, but sometimes because they went through struggles of racism and patriarchy or just being belittled, they sometimes still feel like this is some of the first times they're getting the respect, getting the resources, getting the infrastructure to do the work. But also creates a dynamic where then you have a whole new generation who needs infrastructure and resources to do the work that they need to do for the next 60 years, and it becomes a struggle. How do we not create that dynamic? I know that Dr. Wright does a great job with the HBCU conference and trying to do that piece. But then from your position, how do we ensure that the next generation of leaders can be respected and not have to go through the same thing?
Well, that's a really hard question.
That's what we're here for.
Personally, I spent 8 years at Texas Southern University and HBCU when Dr. Bullard recruited me to go work there. In that role, I was grooming the next generation. That's an HBCU.
Most definitely.
I was working in an environmental policy area department, working with Dr. Bullard as well as with Dr. Danae King, who's also a leader.
Good folks.
And working with communities and applying science to that work. And so that was and is my contribution. I mentored a number of graduate students who themselves have become and are becoming leaders in their own right. So that passing of the baton, I spent 8 years as an academic doing that there. And as I said earlier, within the EPA, even though it's not an academic institution, I have that mindset of still, teaching, inspiring, and then letting folks take ownership of it. So it becomes theirs. That's important. It can't just be mine. It has that knowledge, that, whatever that new approach is, that innovation has to be passed on so that people, whether they're students or staff members, can own it. And it becomes theirs, and then they have the baton. That's my approach. But you're right, though. It does sometimes, maybe I won't get respect for that or even have been given any credit for it sometimes. So I'm not sure how to solve that part.
No, but I hope people hearing this now will understand that's your lens, and you've already done that in different capacities. That's such an important, and understand how important it is for the next generation to be seen and to be heard and to be a part of the solution. I would say one of the things there, so moving forward to where you are now, and I want you just to kind of give the folks what is happening in Region 6.
Oh, okay.
I want you to break it down for them. I am very clear on how tough this job is in this region. I'm also very clear on that sometimes as an environmental movement, we have sometimes not done well as far as broadening the movement. And I'll give this for instance, we know last year, early February, we all watched in horror with the train derailment, right, in East Palestine, Ohio. And many of those communities, because they're predominantly white, middle class, people thought, well, that's not EJ. And it was 100% EJ, right? They themselves are, because of that fence line community. I went there, and I never forget, I never saw the connection between people. Like, I'm obviously from Louisiana, being from a place that's called Cancer Alley, going up there to Ohio, seeing the same people who would look different, but had the same concern about make sure my kid is okay. I don't want people to have cancer. So the one thing that I realized, and I hope people understand this in this country, is that this issue is not about Republican or Democrat. It's not about from Louisiana, Ohio. It's simply about ensuring that everybody in this country has clean air and clean water.
That's right.
That's it. And there are folks who your job is to ensure that if they are violating that, if they are doing things to keep us from having clean air and clean water, we got to find Dr. Nance and your crew to hold them accountable. So maybe you can tell folks how you're doing that. Like, what are some of the things? Give us like a rundown of what Region 6 is doing to ensure people in this region have clean air, clean water.
Absolutely. So just before I do the rundown, my staff brought a couple of brochures. One that provides the rundown of what EPA has done in Cancer Alley, just in Cancer Alley. Now, my region covers 5 states. So we're doing things in Oklahoma, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, and Arkansas. But this handout is just what we have done in Cancer Alley. And it's quite impressive. We're talking about enforcement. We've taken enforcement against a number of the large plants here. We're talking about community air monitors and other grants that we've provided for communities. We've done a lot here. This is more than we've ever done. We were also in lawsuits with several of the companies here. We're doing everything we can. It's going to take time, but we are doing what we can. We're using every tool we have. So let me break down some of the things in general that we've done for Region 6. So the first is grants. I think we've given out, I want to say $156 million worth of grants just in the last 2.5 years, more than any in history. So this money is coming from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. That's a $60 billion going out to EPAs nationwide. And the bipartisan and the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, that's another $41 billion going out nationwide. So we've never had this money. This is more money than EPA has had in its history. So we have money. We've also created some technical assistance centers, 16 across the nation and 2 here in Region 6. One is the Deep South Center. The other one is New Mexico State University. And these are technical assistance centers that reach out to communities and help them access the funds. They help them decide, well, which type of grant do you need? Help them figure out how to put that grant application together so that they can receive the money. So I'm very excited about that. Money's going out to communities. Another thing that is groundbreaking is all of the rulemakings that we've done as a nationwide EPA. And those rules have more impact here because of the high concentration of emissions and pollution that's here. So the rules that we've put together, and it's going to be hard for me to remember them all.
No, I understand.
So, for example,
if your staff is if their staff is in the rooms, they want to yell out 1 or 2, they can. But go ahead.
All right. Well, let me just read my little cheat sheet then.
Yeah, definitely. I got a cheat sheet too.
That's all right, because I have a cheat sheet. So look at these rules. So we have a rule called the Han rule, which regulates air toxics, and that number 1 rule affects Cancer Alley, this area here, where we have a lot of plants that are emitting toxic air, hazardous organics, all of those types of things. So the Han rule is going to help this whole region. Then we have the power plant greenhouse gas reduction requirements. So any power plants in the area, they will have to come down in their emissions. And that'll help with climate change as well. We have the methane rule, again, which attacks any fugitive sources of methane that will impact climate change. And this area has a lot of that. We also reduced our particulate matter standard across the country. We took it from 12 down to 9, and that will help with all kinds of respiratory issues. That will be all over the place. That will be a reduced. That's really a groundbreaking change. Then we have our clean vehicle rule for how much trucks and other vehicles are allowed, the tailpipe emissions. Then we have our open burning and open detonation guidance that reduces the chance that open burning and open detonation will happen near communities. We also have our lead pipe. Every leaded pipe in the country for water supply will be removed within the next 10 years. That's been paid for. Then lead in the soil. We have a new standard for how much lead is allowed to be in soil, and that will affect children. So that's a good rule there. We've banned asbestos, and we've banned PFAS, which is a water. Those are all rules that have just happened in the last year or 2.
Listen, and those rules will, without a doubt, save many lives.
Yes.
So, no, we are ecstatic about those rules. I've told, obviously, Mr. Regan, I'm telling you, Dr. Nance, that we are excited. But let me add a lens to that, right? I think because we want to have, people are listening to this and they expect us to have these real conversations. Those are important. I'll give you a twofer. They're both hard though, but it's a twofer. The one is, why did the administration wait so late to move on some of these things? Particularly understanding that elections have consequences, and our country has the right to vote for who they want, and this administration may not be there, right? So what is being done to ensure that, depending on if we're here, or can anything be done, will these rules go away if the administration is not in place?
If the rules are established early enough, which that's why we were racing to get them done, they're established early enough, then they're set. If they're established close to the end of the administration, then they could be reversed by the following administration. So to prevent that possibility, we have raced to get them done by the deadline so that they will be part of the regulatory part of this country until they get changed maybe in the future. But it takes many years to change a rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been working on these for a while. So we're confident that the ones that I mentioned will be locked in.
The industry. As you know, I'm very fortunate to go to a lot of these climate negotiations around. I'm startled when I was in Ottawa for the Plastics Treaty, and I was overseeing Dubai, and then before that Egypt, before that Scotland. What I'm startled is how many people from industry show up to that's again, not saying if people are coming in good faith, it's great. If they're not, then we have questions. But my thing really is this, and not to name this particular CEO of one of the oil companies, I'll just say in that process. But one thing I was startled when he actually sought me out to talk to me about telling me about thinking that I was wrong on particularly our stance on plastics. And so we had a nice conversation. But one of the things there that was interesting that I realized from talking to him, when I mentioned the health impacts, I didn't feel nothing. Like, it felt like if folks are dying, I didn't get nothing back. You know what I mean? Like, I ain't feel like I can give you our numbers about the health impacts, which things you laid out, how we can stop that. I got profit over people. But that also scared me. So the people in this community, the one thing you've been around, we've had a couple of things we've been at here at the Black History Month celebrations. The one thing their concern is that they think all that's wonderful, but they're dying and they're getting cancer. I ain't see nothing from him. What's the urgency from this administration, Region 6, to ensure particularly vulnerable communities and that we're doing everything we can to reverse even this name, to go from Cancer Alley to Opportunity Alley?
Yeah, I think the government has a pace that it moves at. And under this administration, we've moved faster than normal. We have. There's a lot of...
know that?
I just read off more rules than we have more money than ever. I could talk about... I mean, even though we've done more than ever, it's not enough. We didn't move fast enough. I agree with that. At the same time, we've never moved this fast, and we've never done more. Both of those things are true. When it comes to not caring, that you said you felt like he didn't care.
Yeah.
That's the scariest thing of all. There was a situation while I was in this position that I saw that, not talking about EPA, but I saw that there was not care for certain people in a situation, a disaster situation. And that was scary. How do you make people care? Maybe you have the money, you have the rules, you've even done the work internally so that you have, new systems in place to deal with new, more complex problems. But if people don't care, if they don't rally to the cause, that's a scary thing. And I saw that. There's one particular disaster in the region that happened while I was on my watch, and I had to make people care. I had to generate care. And I couldn't believe it. So I know what you feel there. I feel that same way.
I mean, Dr. Nance, you and I are both blessed because we're in these positions that we're in. And we're now sitting in this room for our ancestors for just trying to fight liberation. That extractive thing of not even looking at particularly certain communities. It's tough. I have just a couple more questions. One, and our producers can obviously chime in here. One of them was, what is your stance on managed retreat? And how are you supporting people who want to stay or leave if they want to before it's an emergency?
Well, a few years ago, I have a lot of experience in disaster management, especially with flooding and climate-induced disasters. I have a lot of publications, so I do know something about that. And when I was working in that area, my biggest concern was the inequity in resources, whether it's before or after a disaster, for either mitigating the damage or recovery or response. The inequity was so embedded in the system. So the idea of managed retreat was foreign to me at that time. I was focused on better distribution of the resources that were available and increasing the amount of resources so that people could continue to live where they were. This idea of managed retreat came out a few years ago. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And the people that are going to be able to manage their retreat are probably going to be the ones with the most resources. There's not any resources for folks who are who are the ones on the bad, on the low side of the resources. So without solving the inequitable problem, with the problems of how do you distribute things, whether it's managed resources, mitigation, recovery, whatever, if you haven't figured out how to make that equitable, then that new idea of managed retreat is still going to be inequitable. So who will be left behind? Will it be the same people that were never served to begin with? And so that, to me, the problem is the inequity. How we decide as a country to solve that problem, we could do that. Whether it's managed retreat or something else, or building a larger levee or whatever it is, it's the inequity that is the problem.
My Lord, this is a good talk, Dr. Nance. I just have one more question. I'll let the producers, if they have one, chime in. Mine is on an equity conversation. I am on the board of a lot of the quote unquote big greens. And I'm also a funder. I would say I'm a senior advisor at Bloomberg. So I try to figure out how to get resources to frontline and first line if I can. But I also realize that there's a lot of groups, particularly in the big greens, who see a difference between climate and community. I see it the same. They almost sometimes see community as them slowing down fighting climate. They see it sometimes as like, this is almost this health conversation or an intersectional environmental movement conversation, a movement that brings in racial justice and queer justice and women's rights and all those things. They said it's slowing down the process. I see it as the only way we can get there. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you. Again, the inequity is the problem. That is the problem. We have to solve that problem, and now we have climate change. That the inequity of climate change can't be ignored, even though it does affect all of us, but it affects us all differently. Our ability to recover, to escape, whatever it might be, or to make changes in our lifestyle so that we can deal with it. I respect the big green groups. I know many of those folks, respect the groups. But if this is starting to be a debate problem, there's a debate between whether to work with communities or to work on climate. I think I said earlier, when I started at EPA Region 6, my very first job was to embed environment and climate change into everything we do. It's both. It was never separate. I don't see them as separate. There's two things we have to do there, but they're together. So it's the first time I'm hearing that that's been separated. I didn't realize that.
Yes, no,
Yeah.
and we had it, part of the permitting process and other pieces. There's times when folks obviously were pushing on EPA and others because they felt that they were EPA listening to the community. Shout out to when we had the tour here throughout your region and other things, but they feel like moving slowly on that. In other words, we need to move, which is a common thing. We've seen it. We saw it as part of the IRA, honestly. Inflation Reduction Act. We saw it, and particularly around issues around what dealing with from the Gulf Coast to Appalachia to the Arctic. We saw it way in the past. I'm old now. We saw it way in the past with the Waxman-Markey bill back when that was there. We've seen it on Forward on Climate. We've seen it on Keystone. We've seen it across. Yeah. There is this conversation where particularly community is great when it's used for the Oppression Olympics to show that Black, brown, indigenous bodies are being harmed. But when it comes down to being part of the solution, to making it, to connect it, somehow those voices get muted out. So we have to fix that, and I'm so glad you said what you said. Producers, anything you want to make sure? Yeah. So Dr. Nance, the difference between EPA, state and local jurisdictions, what do you have jurisdiction over, which you don't, and people can have an idea who is actually in charge of what.
So this basically boils down to the question, when do you call the EPA? So if a concrete batch plant moves into your neighborhood, you don't call the EPA. You call your city or your county. That's who you call. Now, a lot of people call the EPA first, and we will work with folks, but we don't have jurisdiction over local siting issues, local zoning issues. That is a local issue. If the industrial plant near your neighborhood is obviously having problems, it's spewing too much pollution, who do you call? You call the state. Permitting is done by the state. Each plant has a permit that was overseen by the EPA, but it is in control of by the state. So now, if the state doesn't follow up on helping, then EPA can get involved, can talk with the community, hear the concerns, and then when I have my monthly meeting with each state director, I can put those concerns on the agenda, and I do that every month. And I can say, you're not doing very well here. Please do something about your emissions. And then every 5 years when that permit comes up for review by my office, we'll make sure that we look at that. But we're not the first line. And so it's this, I think this is a common thing that everyone has, is a confusion about who's in charge of what. And I actually just yesterday asked my staff to put together a fact sheet or some kind of a communication device, a flyer or something that explains who is in control of what, so that we can start educating people about it. And so my job as the EPA is to write the strongest rule. That's the EPA's job. Write the strong rule. Get money out to people, including the states. We give a lot of money to the state for them to run their programs for permits, oversee those permits, help the state revise the permits to make them more protective. And so, I always show this. It's not necessarily that the federal government is always over the state and can make the state do whatever it wants. We're really operating like this, where the federal government has their role, the state has their role, and we passed that permit authority over to the state many years ago. So the state holds the authority over the permits of every plant. And we have given up that authority, and we just do an oversight role.
So 2 things to that.
Okay.
That's important.
I'm sorry about that. I know
No.
If I could change it myself.
No. We know in this country that sometimes states don't want to do what they need to do. As a matter of fact, as we are taping this conversation, not sure when you hear this conversation, we are literally taping this conversation on the 70th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education. Today is May 17th as we're taping this conversation. And I bring that up because, as we know from that, right after that legislation, people to this day, people closed schools down. Like literally, Virginia, the whole school system was done. No more school around different, obviously around this country.
Yeah.
So I know, obviously, I love my home state, but I also know recently there was a congressperson when some of those rules you mentioned there went forward, literally was talking about putting the administrator in Angola. Like, that literally was something that a member of Congress was literally pushing for. So we have people who are still hostile. So how do you weave through that? I mean, I think people are saying, yeah, what you're telling me to go then, but these folks are in cahoots. They're not helpful. We do need you to kind of, when do you overstep that? I guess it's really, when do you feel the need? When do you realize that the state is not doing their job? And you're like, okay, y'all, we got to step in here and make it happen.
Well, there are a couple of cases just right up the street here that we have taken unprecedented legal action toward industry. We are doing that. It's active litigation, so I can't just talk about it.
Yeah, you can't don't talk about it, but there's
doing it.
Things that you are enforcing the law.
We're suing the company, enforcing the law and suing, doing both.
So the key thing is that when that happens, you definitely step in.
Yeah.
Which is the core.
It's just that we can't step in on every single thing. And then like for educational, we can't step in on education. But, for within the environment, we can. We can also work with, we work with the Department of Justice. Whenever we're suing somebody as EPA, it's actually the Department of Justice is suing. So we do have to work within our government structure to do anything. So that means that we have to, convince them to do that too.
No.
Yeah, the advocacy never ends.
Two last things. How can we support you and what you do? How can people support you? How can people support Region 6? What do you want them to do?
I want them to call Beverly Wright at the Deep South Center and Patricia Sullivan at the New Mexico State. Those are the two technical assistance centers. And I want every single community group and advocacy group to apply for money before it's too late. We have a lot of money.
Wow.
The money's available. Those two technical assistance centers, one is the Deep South Center and one is the University of New Mexico State. They're the ones, that's the way to get the money, is the channel through them. They'll help you put together your application and decide which pot of money is best for your project so that we can have a swarm of people from Region 6 receiving this money. That's what I want.
Last question. There's actually one for you to discuss what the future looks like for you. Sitting in this room, the place of the 8th and 11th slave uprising.
Yeah.
300 years from that day will be 2111. Most of us listening won't be around in 2111. If you are, you found some really good stuff that you need to hit me, Rev, or Dr. Nance, so you can share that goodness. But more than likely, we won't be.
Yeah.
But what we're doing will leave a legacy that will speak to not only what happened here, but also what's happening now in this conversation. For you, understanding that we won't be here forever, what does the future look like for Dr. Nance?
Well, the future that I would like to see and that I probably would be a part of is that we, the government, create a lasting strategy for sacrifice zones. Whether that sacrifice zone is here in Cancer Alley or East Palestine or wherever it is, there needs to be a strategy. We don't have a strategy. We just have little piecemeal things that we're doing, hoping that they will, glue together and come up with some solution, but there's not a strategy. So rather than a strategy for climate change, a strategy for sacrifice zones. That's what I'd like to see. An official strategy.
Dr. Nance, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm your host, Rev Yearwood, on The Coolest Show. And that was the phenomenal Dr. Nance.
Thank you.